So this webinar is going to be on Precise. It's part of our Grid Planning and Analysis Center webinar series on different tools and capabilities we have at the center at NREL. This is focused on Precise, specifically on interconnection related to distributed energy resources. Myself, I'm Killian McKenna. I'm a group manager here of our Distribution Edge team here at NREL. And then today I'll also be accompanied by Darice Guittet and also by Sheikh Hassan, SMUD. We've got a big team of a lot of different folks at NREL have been working on Precise over multiple years. So Sharon Ann Abraham, Darice Guittet, Kapil Dawadi, Adil Latif, Adarsh Nagarajan, and myself. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. So the fundamental issue of what we're looking at today is how to connect rooftop solar systems and the interconnection process. So I'm not sure if folks are advancing, but we should be on the slide number 2 of the presentation. But what we're looking at is, what is the customer experience? How are people dealing with unpredictable outcomes when they've submitted an application for rooftop solar and other distributed generation? Right now, customers are experiencing unpredictable times, interconnection logjams where folks can be waiting days, weeks, months to get a decision on an interconnection, and it also experiencing unpredictable outcomes as well in terms of scenarios where interconnection applications might be rejected, where the outcome isn't very transparent, or situations where there is a request to modify the decision on the interconnection in terms of modifying capacity. In terms of what utility planning engineers are seeing, they're being inundated with new requests due to the massive growth in rooftop solar, due to decreasing solar prices, and also due to attractive schemes in terms of net energy metering and the next generation of net energy metering applications. But also one of the big challenges that utility engineers are facing is in terms of a lack of visibility of impacts on the system. So interconnection applications are being submitted, and then the utility planning engineers, it's really a question of, do they have the tools to see the visibility that those applications have on the network in terms of the thermal impact, the voltage impact, what's the impact on time series capacity and time series loading on the network. So those are the big problems in terms of the wait times, the unpredictable outcomes, and then the lack of visibility and tools for planning engineers to deal with their side in terms of making proper reliability assessments on how these systems are going to impact the grid. We can go to the next slide. So overall, this is an evolving space, right? And there's some inefficiencies in the current process. And the pain points are this fast growing queue of distributed solar applications, and then a lack of ability in terms of capabilities of planning engineers to analyze the system, the impacts of these systems. And this has led to a big logjam, which is having major impacts for customers and DER developers, and also pain points for planning engineers. In terms of the interconnection process, customers are submitting applications, that joins an interconnection into a queue, and that goes for initial review. And really where we're focusing on is the technical screening and the supplemental reviews, and that's what planning engineers have to focus on in terms of, what kind of impacts is the system going to have to the grid? Can I accept it as is? Do I need to make any recommendations? Do I need to move to grid upgrades? And that's really what we're focused on here. The rest of the process in terms of interconnection agreement, procurement and construction, commissioning and inspection, all of those processes can get delayed because planning engineers don't have the availability to do the technical screens because there's too much of a logjam, and that there's kind of, a challenge in terms of the visibility. So we can go to the next slide. So that challenge needs an innovative solution, right? It needs a tool that can provide high visibility on network impacts, that can provide fast response times in terms of the outcome for customers. But also, particularly when we talk about solar, a major piece that needs to happen is what is the evaluation that we can make and how smart inverters can help grid integration. So, every DER system being interconnected in the US right now has a smart inverter equipped there that has functionality in terms of providing voltage regulation and voltage support that can be leveraged. So that's another big piece that we need to have tools and capabilities to. So the overall objective that we have for this problem is how do we automate, streamline, and provide good visibility on the network impacts that DERs can have, so planning engineers can make, good decisions, and also where they can leverage advanced inverter functions where appropriate. We can go to the next slide. So the tool that we've developed at NREL is called PRECISE. It was developed in partnership with Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD, out in California. We'll hear from one of the planning engineers from SMUD later in this presentation. It won an R&D 100 award in 2019. We developed this with SMUD, and it was also fully integrated and deployed at SMUD in spring of 2022. And what PRECISE does is it takes an interconnection application. It provides high visibility on the network impacts of that interconnection, makes accept and modify decisions, and enables customers to get much faster response times. So interconnections that could have taken days or weeks to get to, we've got the capability to turn them around in minutes, but turn them around with much greater visibility for the planning engineers than they would have had before. So this is a tool that we're excited about. It's something that we're telling the industry about, and we think it solves a really critical problem at a critical time. Next slide. So what is PRECISE and what does it do? So first of all, we're automating the interconnection evaluation to streamline solar grid integration. So what would have happened before with utilities that they would have used heuristic screens, and they wouldn't have been able to do like detailed, what are called supplemental studies. We're doing that for every rooftop interconnection application. We're evaluating the grid impacts, which helps us to avoid costly and lengthy analysis by planning engineers and the use of, sometimes overly conservative heuristics because we don't have the visibility otherwise. We leverage smart inverter functionality or advanced inverter functionality as needed. We provide a standardized, repeatable, automated process for evaluating solar interconnection requests. And we're providing benefits to the utilities, installers, as well as customers and solar developers. Next slide. So we can click through so that the bottom graphic is here too. So the workflow overall is that a utility would receive an interconnection request, and PRECISE is calculating, where in the network that interconnection is. We're calculating taking in the PV technical data, and then we're outputting network impacts and how smart inverter functionality can be leveraged in providing the utility with recommendations and network impact analysis. That sub workflow of like what's happening behind the hood there is we're modeling each PV system, modeling every panel, the tilt, azimuth, inverter capacity, inverter ratio to AC to DC. We're running power flow analysis for every hour of which there's solar production, evaluating the needs of how smart inverter functionality can help grid integration, checking voltage, loading, looking at the curtailment that a customer could experience maybe from volt VAR activation. And we also, if we come across a network constraint, evaluate the capacity that could be accommodated without the need for grid upgrades, which has been something that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on. And then PRECISE is making a recommendation in terms of accept as is, accept but use some smart inverter settings, or offer this path where maybe you could get acceptance with a reduced inverter capacity. And then planning engineers can go and then make decisions with customers in terms of, if there is a case for grid upgrades or alternatives so that they have those tools in their back pocket. Next slide. One of the biggest challenges of doing this automation and creating this type of analysis pipeline is the data side of things. So, we wanted to have visibility on the load on terms of, modeling all the way down to the meter, in terms of the relationship between customers and the interconnection and the DER technical data. So we were using diverse and what is typically siloed distribution data to build a really comprehensive picture of the network and the incoming DERs. So we're using AMI to create net load profiles. We're using GIS to get secondary information and meter mapping. We're using CIS to, look at that relationship between like building parcels and meters. and DER ownership and what programs they're on. We're using interconnection technical data to bring in all of those, tilt, azimuth, panel size, inverter capacity, and the status of the interconnection. We use PowerFlow models to stitch the primary and the secondary get together. So we're doing PowerFlow down to the meter. And then we're using SCADA to also kind of help in terms of that, like what is the consumption at the substation. And this was a huge effort, involved like a lot of different team members at SMUD and NREL to bring all of these data systems together so we could really get a complete picture of what are the impacts of incoming DER applications. We can go to the next slide. One of the major features of what we did was really capturing everything down to the grid edge. So we were modeling each distribution feeder and then also modeling all of the secondaries and doing that PowerFlow and OpenDSS, which is a open source PowerFlow tool developed by EPRI. So for the single utility working with SMUD, which is a really big effort, we modeled over 800 feeders and thousands of secondaries as well. Modeling the distribution transformer, secondary mains, service lines, right down to the meter. We can go to the next slide. One of the exciting things that we're able to validate and do with Precise is, look at those secondary models and run those PowerFlow scenarios to see, okay, if we just take the existing data, run PowerFlow and see where voltages are high, does that align with where we're seeing a lot of solar? When you get high levels of solar on a network, you're injecting power that pushes up the voltage, just like if you had a water network and if you started, reversing the flow of water, you'd increase pressure on those pipes. So that kind of a knowledge of high voltage or high pressure on a water network is pretty analogous. So what you're seeing up on that top right-hand corner is a heat map of the voltages on the distribution network. So where you're seeing voltages are high, that's where we would have expected that you would have seen more solar on the network. And when we look at that with satellite, we're able to, and with other data sets, we're able to see, okay, look, our modeling is pretty accurate down at the secondary level, and we're able to see those impacts. Next slide. One thing that was really exciting on Precise was leveraging advanced metering infrastructure data or smart metering data to capture power flow and capture voltage. So this is increasingly in the US, the AMI rollout has been really strong. This is actually in the bottom right-hand corner is data from 2020. More recent data, most utilities have a pretty good smart metering data infrastructure right now and coverage. And most of that data or most of the smart meters are able to capture voltage data as well. What that allowed us to do is capture the voltage on distribution transformers using essentially a very basic form of state estimation, which enables us to have an idea of the health of the network before we start modeling the impact of solar. So for every secondary, we're able to use this data. An advantage over this of doing power flow from, say, the substation down is that it's really difficult to capture all of the actuation and operation of different LTCs and capacitor banks. So using AMI really gives us, the as-is health conditions of the network that we're able to use. So we can go to the next slide. A big part of what we worked on was holistic solar modeling. So making sure that the application intake captured those relationships between panels and different panel tilts, azimuths, capacities down to inverters, so we could capture everything from like a 2-panel setup behind one inverter to multiple panels and string inverters. So we're able to capture all of those relationships, which enables us to capture some of the smart inverter functionality, such as volt VAR and volt walk control, where smart inverters are able to control reactive power or active power to control or provide some voltage regulation. So that's something that we're did a lot in terms of the application intake to make sure that we're really holistically modeling DER. We're also using local solar irradiance in SMUD service area, so we can locally attribute solar irradiance profiles to DER production adequately. Next slide. A big part of our work was modeling volt VAR curves. So with 1547 2018 standard in smart inverters is this functionality to and provide some form of voltage control at the grid edge. So we're originally in the very first phase of PRECISE, we developed this optimization routine that could develop locally appropriate fault VAR curves. In the end, we ended up using California Rule 21 as a default option that we could explore whether we wanted to leverage that or not. But part of our work here was developing optimal power flow models of three-phase imbalance systems and being able to model optimal fault VAR curves, which is a capability that we developed but haven't utilized as much in terms of operation. Next slide. Yeah, so what we're going to do next is we've got Sheikh Hassan here, who's one of the key planning engineers here at SMUD, and he's going to present some statistics on the deployment of PRECISE at SMUD and kind of give some of his experience. So Sheikh, I'm going to pass it over to you for the next two slides.
Thank you, Killian. This is Sheikh Hassan, Principal Engineer in the Electric Distribution Planning Group. My primary role is that of DG Interconnection Lead. I just have a couple of slides sharing statistics, as Killian mentioned. So PRECISE went online live for us in spring of 2022. And quickly in the first 6 months, there were about 1,700 applications that the software tool processed. Fast forward to today, every single PV application that comes in passes through the PRECISE tool. It has now evaluated close to 5,000 applications, amounting to somewhere around 10 megawatts of rooftop solar. Our estimate, conservative estimate, is that with the automation provided by PRECISE, especially with now factoring in volt VAR set points, custom volt VAR set points for every single application, we are saving about 40 to 45 minutes of distribution planning engineers' time per application. So this amounts to somewhere to just under 4,000 man hours saved since the tool went online. The vast majority of the applications that we are seeing right now, or have seen up to now, is still passed with what we call unity power factor, or basically no change needed. A few percent, the statistic here is about 12%. I think this number is slightly up now, close to 17%, where we are requiring Rule 21 volt VAR set points. We have not seen any custom volt VAR set points, which the software also has the ability to produce. Another 14% or so have basically been approved with slightly reduced capacity. If you factor in the total number of time spent by the tool processing this vast number of applications, it just amounts to a few minutes. So massive improvement over reducing errors and increased processing times. The application still today is averaging about 13 applications a day. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, just the sheer number of man hours, distribution planning engineers hours saved. If you just do a basic calculation with 40 to 45 minutes over 2 years, our anticipation is that with 5,000 applications coming in every year, labor cost is about 300K saved annually. Because of the quick turnaround time of how fast thousands of load flow simulations are run by the PRECISE software for each application, because it's doing time series analysis. There's no delays, quick turnaround times. We have also built in some internal email communication that the software kind of initiates once it goes through its different steps. So that has streamlined our process and shortened our turnaround times. More crucially, with what I call targeted increased hosting capacity, we have been able to accommodate a lot more PV without requiring any infrastructure upgrade expenditures, especially on the secondary side, because now because we can leverage things like volt-var curves, both standard, California Rule 21 and custom curves potentially, we are now able to accommodate PV without requiring infrastructure updates like upsizing of the transformer or reconductoring of the secondary wire. So that has saved our customers money and, targeted again, allowed us to increase our PV hosting capacity. Those are the two slides I had, Killian, so back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Sheikh. So kind of looking at the workflow for Precise. So overall, this is a pretty modular tool, and it's very easy to adjust objective functions based on different utility use cases. So this is the use case specifically at SMUD. So when a new interconnection request comes in, like Sheikh was saying, first of all, we're evaluating unity power factor. So that's evaluating the application without any smart inverter functionality being utilized in terms of voltage regulation. So if that meets criteria, if that avoids thermal and voltage constraints, then that's the acceptance criteria. If that doesn't meet criteria, then we start to evaluate standard volt-var curves, as in those in Rule 21 in California. If that meets criteria, great. And then we're issuing that application with those smart inverter functions or those advanced inverter functionality. If those don't meet criteria, then we start to evaluate custom advanced inverter functions. Essentially looking at a scenario where we're requesting more VAR support from the customer. If that doesn't meet criteria, then we start to look at a scenario where we determine the maximum PV capacity that would avoid violations. And then that data is sent over to the planning team with Sheikh and the rest of his team, where they can make decisions in terms of offering the customer an option where a PV capacity that would avoid violations, or working with the customer on potential grid upgrades and exploring those options. So what we're trying to do with what we've done here with Precise is looking at these scenarios where, hey, there is a path here where we can accept this as is, or gradually looking at smart inverter functionality and using into that and seeing how that can help with the acceptance criteria when a constraint is hit. So that's kind of the overall workflow. We can go to the next slide here. One of the important pieces is what are the constraints that we're really examining? So we are running power flow. We're running thousands of different power flow scenarios for each hour of the year for different smart inverter functionalities. But critically, we're examining reverse power flow constraints, looking at 100% of the nameplate loading for lines, mains, service transformers. And then we're also evaluating against ANSI EC 84.1 for the service voltage for plus or minus 5%. But additionally to that, we also examine against SMUD's normal bands of voltage operation. So every utility has a kind of different band in which normal voltages lie. Some utilities like operating on the low side, some utilities like operating on the high side, some like a little bit more of a headroom from the upper ANSI limit, so we're more close to it. So that allows us to see, okay, when are interconnection applications going to start pushing voltages outside of normal operation? And that also allows us to ease into setting volt-var settings. So we can look at those conditions where we start to get more and more voltages being pushed outside of normal operation. And really the only way we're able to do this is by heavily leveraging the voltage data and the AMI, or the smart metering infrastructure, which is really critical. So we're able to examine the percentage of customers and the percentage of time in which voltages we're getting pushed out. We're able to do this for every feeder, which is really exciting. So we can go to the next slide. In terms of the tech stack, the most important takeaway from this slide is that there's a lot of different components here. There's a lot of third-party integration with some of the utility data systems for the application intake, for the different control processes and where the AMI data is stored, in terms of error logs that we have as well. Going back to that data side, there was a huge amount of effort doing QA and QC on all of the different diverse data sets that we're using, which also enabled us to see where there could be big improvements on data quality to kind of really bring everything together, which was really exciting. We're using OpenDSS, which is an open source power flow solver. We use other tools that we have at NREL in terms of like a huge bunch of Python capabilities that we have for data analytics on top of OpenDSS, and also different tools for transferring models from like Synergy to OpenDSS, which we also do, so we can do these Python wrappers and automate this. But there's a lot of different components on the tech stack here. Next slide. And in terms of the integration, there's a lot of different databases that we're leveraging in terms of GIS, in terms of PowerFlow, in terms of AMI, in terms of where SCADA is. So there are some, unique precise SQL databases that bring these different elements together in these different data architectures as well. So there's a huge part of Precise, which is just data management and data mapping and doing all this QA, QC to line everything up so that we can do this power flow analysis. So there's a lot of different pieces that we use here, a lot of different places where we have APIs that are either doing push or calls to different applications here. So yeah, we can probably go to the next slide in the interest of time. Yeah, so in terms of what we have multiple subroutines that are fetching interconnection applications every 10 minutes, that are storing results for the planning engineers and sending out emails for different automations for when we see that there's an issue. In terms of preparing power flow models, like we're refreshing the GIS extract every week. We're pulling AMI for the last year up to the last month. And then we're pulling applications every 10 minutes. So there's a number of different workflows that are refreshing data systems and refreshing the quality of what we can do to try and make sure that we have the most up-to-date knowledge on the network when we're doing our power flow analysis. Next slide. Yeah, so it was really great that you guys could hear from Sheikh and from SMUD here on this call, but there's, outside of SMUD, there's been a lot of, different industry articles that have picked up Precise, that have highlighted this problem. So it's been really great to see that we've had a tangible impact on the interconnection process, but also really highlighting that this can be done, right? That, this data here is here, and we're kind of lined up well in terms of we have more data and more visibility on the distribution system than we've ever had before, which can really enable us to do this type of analysis, which is really exciting. And we're looking forward to partnering with more people to solve these problems. Next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Darice, who's going to, talk about this next phase in terms of like, what's the future? So to date, we've done all this automation for rooftop solar. Now we're exploring a lot of other options, including flexible interconnection and increased complexity, which I'm going to hand over to Darice now to present some of these exciting features. So Darice, over to you.
Great, thanks, Killian. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about two main ways that we're tackling increased complexity in the interconnections that Precise can evaluate. So the first major feature is the ability to interconnect multiple DER types. Precise already has the automation needed to perform the power flow for diverse incoming DERs. And so the next step is to model and be able to evaluate complex interconnections, including DER storage, electric vehicles, vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, and DER gateways. So utilities are already seeing these types of interconnection requests and aren't sure how to model them or to evaluate their grid impact. And so we're trying to work on that as well. When you have multiple types of DERs, there's more complexity in their configuration and their behavior. They can follow different schedules with different power control systems. And so we need to model and understand the impact of these systems with multiple DER types in order to interconnect safely. And the second major feature is flexible interconnection. Flexible interconnection It's a broad term that covers a range of methods, but the idea is to use DER control schemes to manage export to stay within grid constraints. So there are many utilities that have already hit their hosting capacities, such as California, New Mexico, Colorado, and Hawaii. And so as places get higher and higher levels of DER, such as PV, they're eventually going to hit that limit. And the only way to keep accommodating more is flexible interconnection. So it's an immediate solution for a current problem. So the plot here shows an example of when flexible interconnection could be useful and how it could be applied. So it shows a single site hosting capacity that's being exceeded by an oversized DER. So there's energy that needs to be curtailed or shifted. Under conventional interconnection, the DER nameplate is reduced, and so that reduces DER production for all time periods. By contrast, flexible interconnection restricts DER production only during limited periods, and so this results in additional DER production and also a higher capacity that's interconnected. So those hosting capacity constraints often show up only during limited periods, such as shoulder periods with minimum net load. So these shoulder periods happen between winter and summer. During winter, there's high heating and lighting loads. During summer, there's cooling loads. During spring and fall, however, the loads are lower, but the PV is relatively high. And so this leads to backfeed and solar hitting grid constraints. And so with fixed interconnection, these short periods of net load will limit the interconnection capacity, but with flexible interconnection, reducing DER exports only during constrained periods, it provides multiple benefits for both the utility and the DER customer. So you can have increased utilization of existing infrastructure, revenue for the DR customer, revenue from faster connection. And for both of them, it enables more renewables and electrification. So flexible interconnection can take the form of a schedule of DER export limits. These schedules can be created using annual data. But then the question is, what type of profile do you have? How many values are there? Which and how many years of data do you use? And how do you add a safety buffer to the constraints that you're looking at in order to account for year-to-year changes? And those changes become more important as the variance increases with higher resolution profiles. So you can have a 288 value profile, which is where you have an export limit per month hour, or you can have a 12 value profile, which is the export limit per month. And so these are compared in the bottom plot. You can see in the higher resolution profile, it allows for more DER export, but there's going to be a lot more variation. The lower resolution profile has more margin of safety. Both of these fixed interconnection profiles are still offering more DER interconnection than the fixed capacity result. And so the flexible interconnection workflow, it's an extension of the precise interconnection evaluation process, which is already evaluating different inverter settings and is started by a customer triggered event. And we can provide these time varying export bounds using PowerFlow time series because all of that infrastructure is already there. And in doing this process, we can try out different flexible interconnection profiles, provide curtailment estimates and energy production estimates to the planning engineers and to the customers as part of a set of interconnection options that are evaluated. And with that, I'll pass it back to Killian.
Great, thanks, Darice. So yeah, just to summarize, Precisis has been this really great partnership between NREL and SMUD, where we've been able to do the research, development, and the deployment to see this right the way through. We're looking for active partners to advance the state of the art and also for looking at deployments of Precise. one thing that SMUD is exploring is, how can we bring this to the market? How can we scale this? But in the meantime, we're very interested in kind of active projects that we can further refine and, do some more of the research on how does this look like for other utilities. So we're very interested in partnerships. It's available to license, and we're looking for partners and interested in partners to expand its capabilities. And we're already working with, other, unis and also IOUs and co-ops in terms of looking at, new opportunities for deployment. And yeah, there's a lot more work to do. Like we're starting work on the flexible interconnection side. We're starting work on multi-DER applications, looking at solar plus storage, and where we start to look at electric vehicles as well and vehicle to grid applications. And also looking at what could primary connected or larger DER interconnection, automation, and evaluation look like too. So I'd say we're at the start of an exciting journey, and really thank you for joining today. Hopefully this was of interest, and I think we're gonna move on to the Q&A. There's a number of Q&A in the chat, but Danielle, I can just look at those and answer them in real time here, or do you have a preference?
Yeah, I was just gonna read them to you. So if you want to answer them live, then we'll go ahead and do that. Let's start with, this one says, given the frequent close coupling between PV connections and EV charging, can EV charging upgrades be considered in PRECISE in some way?
That's a really great question. So yeah, we are exploring in this next phase of PRECISE with SMUD in terms of how to evaluate multi-DER applications. So when I say multi-DER, that could be PV plus EVs. We've got a long history of some really great EV modeling capabilities at NREL with the EVIX suite. We're working with those team members to kind of explore some opportunities here. But this really gets into coupling demand flexibility and kind of modeling the whole site import export. One aspect that we're looking at is, how to start thinking of vehicle to grid or vehicle to home applications and how to make those evaluations. Another piece that we're really just in conversations on is, is there this opportunity where you might start to put load serving applications through a process similar to interconnection? It's very early days on that. It's kind of, initial conversations, but this is where there's this question on, are we going to be looking at grid upgrades, or can we use some flexibility on the charging side in terms of managed charging to alleviate or lower the level of grid upgrades required? So similar in terms of the analogy of flexible interconnection and power control systems. On the load side, there's this notion of managed charging and automatic or automated load management, or ALM kind of programs. So yeah, we're starting to explore that space as well. But the interesting part is the kind of hard modeling of like modeling the power flow, bringing in AMI, bringing in SCADA. That's all the same. So that platform and those capabilities are already there. So yeah, in a short answer, yes, we're looking at that.
Awesome. The next question is, does SMUD have plans and leeway to request implementation of smart inverter functionality in the future on systems for which it is not required at the initial interconnect?
Sheikh, do you want to take that question?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. So, I mean, in short, we do not have such plans. I mean, when you think about the legacy systems already in place, not all inverters that are functioning right now have the ability, or are basically smart inverters, right? So legacy inverters are not smart inverters. They may not have that ability or functionality available. The newer systems that are going in, or the smart inverters that are going in, our approach right now is still first come, first served, slash, set it and forget it. So if, let's say, you have an add-on system added to a system that we did not require smart inverter functions, specifically volt var functions, but if it's an add-on system that's being added on several years into when the initial system went in, we may require, smart inverter functions for that added on system. So that's where we are at with that. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you so much. Another question says, how is the impact on the protection system coordination done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now our evaluation are on rooftop systems on the secondary level. So we are currently not, at least in Precise, we're not doing protection analysis, and I would say yet. You know, in this next phase, we want to start looking at primary systems, but then we also want to start to look at, which is a question that we've had and we've been exploring with multiple utilities, of what is the threshold of accumulated secondary connected systems at which stage you should start to look at protection coordination. In terms of, you know, looking at fault current contributions, start to look at sensing, you know, start to, you know, analyze the impact on circuit breakers and reclosers, and you know, see how reverse power flow is going to start to impact those devices. So it's not something that we've done yet with Precise in terms of what Precise is providing us in terms of analysis. It's something that we're interested in and is a really big question in terms of, like, especially for the kind of incremental DER, it's kind of like a straw that breaks the camel's back, right? What's the threshold that you would start to look at for an individual DER? Sheikh, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd want to add on that side. Like, that's the kind of Precise side of the house so far.
Yeah, for primary protection, I think you covered it well. You know, when we look at the thermal protection, so there is that aspect already sort of covered with the thermal capability evaluation. But yeah, primary would be hopefully the next stage, maybe once we add that functionality to Precise, where we start looking on the primary side, but it's not there yet. So the typical way for us to evaluate impact on protection would be, you know, running our load flow simulation using a load flow simulation software. So we in-house use Synergy here at SMUD. So that's how we would, you know, evaluate that.
Great.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question says, what is the processed amount of rooftop solar in terms of fraction of typical peak load?
Yeah, Sheikh, I know SMUD's summer peaking is around like 3 gigawatts, but I don't know what the current total level of solar is.
Yeah. So our historic all-time peak was 3299. So, you know, just shy of 3.3 gigawatts. I think every year we have been averaging, and I'm just talking, you know, broadly speaking, right, behind the meter, well, actually primarily behind the meter, rooftop PVs. I think our numbers hover around 30 megawatts every year, which is kind of, you know, heavy on the commercial side. Very few applications on the commercial with bigger systems. Rooftop PVs, residential, 10 megawatts. One of my senses that that's a typical average year. Our anticipation is that, especially in the, you know, California market in mind, that this number is probably going to increase. We are seeing a lot many more battery applications, which we don't evaluate through Precise right now. But if we were to add those, then this number would be higher. So I guess the answer here would be just over, you know, I would say if we go with 30 megawatts, it's like 1% approximately of the total historic all-time peak. Don't know if that's what the question is asking there.
Awesome. Did you have anything to add, Killian?
No, I think Sheikh, what I remember from 2021, but these are old numbers, is there was like 300 megawatts each installed of solar. So I'm sure you guys are much higher than that, but yeah, I think
that's
there's
right. The total number of solar rooftop PVs, yeah, that's about right. Just over 300.
Yeah.
All right, next question says, how does ERCOT connect and manage compared to SMUD?
Sheikh, do you want to take that one? I can take a stab at it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know the ERCOT process, so won't be able to provide a comparison there.
Yeah, so I don't know whether the question is referring to distributed systems or bulk systems, bulk interconnection, because those are quite different processes. But I would say for distributed, like a lot of utilities are still using screens similar to those found in the FERC's SGIP, so small generation interconnection procedures. And really how precise differs from those screens in FERC's SGIP is that we are actually doing the power flow analysis, impact analysis, instead of using heuristic screens that could be like, okay, if you compare the nameplate of DER to the nameplate of transformers and or like the, feeder peak demand, there's a number of different percentages that they have for recommended. And those recommendations are really based on not having the visibility of the actual impacts. So that's probably my catch-all answer for that question, not knowing the more details of what's being asked there, is that we are providing that visibility of actual network impacts rather than using screens, which are more heuristics, and screens are really there for when you don't have visibility.
Thank you so much. So the next question says, it's a little bit of a long one. Not all utilities have power flow models like Synergy or CYMDIST. Is this a prerequisite for getting set up with Precise? Or did you calibrate OpenDSS from the bottom up? I'll remind you what these are. There's a few. How long did the OpenDSS calibration take for SMUD, and how long would it take for cases where existing models are not available?
Yeah, I can keep all that in my head.
Okay.
So yeah. So first of all, do you need power flow models to use Precise? I would say no, but it would help. So we've worked with a lot of different distribution utilities here at NREL with a lot of different quality of data sets. Some utilities we've worked with just have GIS, and from the GIS, we've been able to build out power flow models. Other utilities have good primary models, and we're able to use those, but they don't have any secondary information for which we've created heuristics or we've created synthetic secondaries. Other utilities have good secondary information in their GIS systems. And then we start to stitch together the primary power flow model with the secondary GIS system. So we've kind of seen it all through multiple utility partnerships and over many, many years in terms of the various data quality that's out there. I will say that the more data you start off with, the better visibility, the more successful you're going to be if you worked with us or try to do something like this. And in terms of the other question of how long did it take to us to build the OpenDSS power flow models, for the primary, that was quicker. And then for the secondary, that took us a while because we were trying to build those out from GIS, but also using AMI and using a few different data sets to do validation of those secondary power flow models. I would say all in all, the process of that full data integration was a 2-year effort of combined, SMUD and NREL development. I will say we've gotten a lot faster at some of those processes because we have much better ideas of that data architecture and building out that data schema of what we need. So, and also in terms of the capabilities we've developed to do QA and QC and do network health checks. Like the first time we tried to bring all this data together, we had an okay-ish success rate, but not good enough for prime time in terms of fully automating this. But what we were able to do is bring all this data in, use it to do a health check on the full kind of data piece from like health check from AMI, SCADA, GIS, adding in all these filters for where data could be missing or erroneous to say, hey, this isn't good enough. And also track it back to the source where there might have been input. errors or errors in terms of how the data was structured. And going through that process, we were able to get a success rate of around 95+% in terms of all of these different models for every secondary working successfully, which was really great. But we've gone through that process with a lot of utilities in terms of bringing all this data together. And the other kind of key point is it's not just valuable for interconnection, it's valuable for everything. So if you're trying to do, integrated distribution planning and trying to run power flow analyses for electrification impacts, for planning for high levels of DER, trying to be able to bring all this data together is really critical to get visibility on how to plan out the network. So there's a lot of other ancillary benefits for going through that type of process.
Thanks. And we have one more. This will be the last one. And then I have a few notes about the upcoming webinars in the series. So this one says, one thing I'm curious about is since these improved screens are more complex than the simplified screenings that were or are more commonly performed, why did interconnection decisions take longer previously? I would have assumed them to be quicker, but worse decisions.
Yeah, I'll take this first and then I'll hand this over to Sheikh. There is a element of truth in that in terms of if you are using screens and if everything is passing the screens, then it is quick. However, if things are failing screens and if you have to move to a supplemental study, that's where things are really going to slow down. There's also a like for like comparison in terms of if you are trying to do the type of analysis for every interconnection application that we're doing at Precise, that's where you would have this bigger burden on planning engineers, because it's like if you're using screens, and I've talked to many different planning engineers who are like, well, were those screens good enough? Because I don't have visibility on what the actual impacts are. I'm just hoping those screens are going to keep me in safe check. So yeah, if you're using screens and if everything is passing screens, well, then you're fine. But as you get to higher and higher levels of DER, things start to fail screens and you move into supplemental study, and that's when things start to get delayed. But Sheikh, I'd be curious if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, spot on, Killian. Also, since the 2018 IEEE 1547 standard came out, volt-var set points are now a requirement. So the question, or providing voltage support is a requirement. So the question we had to answer internally was, do we just require a standard volt-var set point for every single installation and potentially subject every single installation to curtailment certain times of the year, or do we just use it where we need it? So performing that type of analysis would add time to the interconnection process, how it was done previously. So that's where the real sort of savings are coming in with the type of detail analysis that's being performed. We weren't performing in the past. It wasn't really needed in the past. But as soon as you start doing it, and the sheer volume of applications that we are seeing in California, which have been trending upwards year over year, are expected to increase even more. That's where Precise really has shown for us.
Awesome. All right, I think that was our last question. Any final comments, Killian, before I wrap it up?
No, just if folks are interested, please reach out to us. We're always looking for partners and talking to people in this space. There's 3,000 something distribution utilities in the US, and this is a big industry problem. So we're always looking to hear from other people's experiences and looking for ways that we can scale our impact. But no, thanks so much, all.
Thanks, everyone. So just a reminder to please join us on April 9th for the Powered by Disco webinar hosted by Sharon Ann Abraham and Shivani Ghosh. We will be uploading a recording of this webinar to NREL's YouTube channel, which is NREL Learning, and we'll send out an email to everyone once that's live. In that email, we will also include a link to a feedback form. So if you could provide comments, this is the kickoff webinar of a 6-webinar series. We want to make sure that the upcoming webinars are as valuable to you as they can be. So please fill out that form and let us know your thoughts and what you're looking forward to hearing more about. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to energy.analysis@nrel.gov. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.